This is the Uncollared Podcast, off-the-cuff conversations with three progressive pastors at the intersection of religion, politics, and culture. I'm Todd Leonard. I'm senior pastor with Glendale City Church of Seventh-day Adventists. In a moment, I'll be joined by Galen, an ordained minister with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and Shane Kinnison, senior pastor at First Baptist Church of Glendale. Today, our conversation is entitled The Corporate Manipulation of American Individualism. I hope you enjoy our conversation. All right, so last week we started our conversation on individualism, and Shane, your idea that we've seen a shift over history from a concept of God-given freedom to a structural governmental independence that came through the Enlightenment. And then your suggestion, your observation that maybe in parts of our country at least, and with some of us, that we're starting to see a slide past independence into a very self-centered, selfish individualism. And so we want to pick back up there today and explore that a little further. So thanks for bringing this subject to our attention, Shane.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Good to be with you today. And I think you're right. I think we can continue to work from that idea of this movement of freedom to independence to individualism and what is on the other side of individualism, perhaps in some kind of extremist views. But the article that we've been referencing is entitled Radical Individualism Raging Throughout America. Radical Individualism Raging Throughout America, written by Matthew Miller. And so in this article, the author states that collectivism and individualism, which were the two groupings that we were discussing last week, collectivism and individualism are not fixed states of being, the idea that you're either one or the other, but that instead we all have proclivities toward both, depending on our setting and situation. Now, I think the article also lends to the idea that we are, in essence, either cut out of more of a collective mentality or an individualistic mentality, but that there are characteristics of both of those thoughts that could be positive, helpful, beneficial, and we probably interface with those thoughts from time to time, regardless of what kind of leaning we would have. We probably do interface with some of those other thoughts from those other groups or camps. Let me just share with you a couple of thoughts, and then we'll dive in. In quoting researchers, the author says that it boils down to how much each society views relationships. And both social constructs have their pitfalls. Part of what makes societies collectivist is tight relationships. And they reference countries such as Japan, Korea, India, where people feel stuck in relationships, or they're placed into caste or some kind of preconceived parameter of relationship, so that their social world is fixed and tight. And interestingly, the author says that in these cultures where people depend on each other, it doesn't necessarily mean that they like each other. So it doesn't have anything to do much with emotional connection as far as friendship and familial feelings, but instead it has to do with structures and constructs that are tightly woven, and that you're in this certain construct, and therefore you are depending on others to help you or to assist you. And it has to do sometimes more with being dependent on people than liking people. Then you turn that coin over on the other side, and the author says that in individualistic circles and individualism, that those societies offer freedom of movement in relationships, i.e., if you don't like your friends, you leave them. If your friends don't make you happy, you find new friends. And so this idea then that we kind of can go either way in our current culture and our current environment nationally, we can go either way, and we can borrow from collectivism, we can borrow from individualism. By and large, we're going to lean one way or the other, right, as to who we are by nature and nurture. But we can borrow the good perhaps from either or both.
It's interesting in the midst of all of that, that when we need it, we function as depending upon what we need, and we may be in a more individualistic society here in America, but what is it that as soon as there's a disaster, everybody pulls together and we fall into that collective nature that is so necessary and important. And we see those relationships and appreciate them on the wider expanse until things get back to normal again. And then it's back to me and mine and my own individualism. And I think that's something that's really in part kind of curious to me about all of this, that we don't in a lot of ways recognize that, I think, or on a social and on a society basis with that. We love the fact that we're America and we are exceptional and stuff. But then we start dividing out who the Americans are until it's a problem. And then we'll help anybody and be helped by anybody. Does that make sense? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what we all do at times pull together voluntarily. There does just seem to be, I think, if you were to look at which way are we trending right now, it seems like we're much more willing, or we're self tribalizing. There isn't an established caste system, but we are self tribalizing. And we've seen this very much in the last few years of defriending or unfriending people on our Facebook pages or our Instagram followers if we don't like what they're posting, or we don't like what how they comment to our posts. We don't want anybody who doesn't think like us to be part of our group. And so then there becomes these ideologically similar people all gather together online or at in a gathering in the community, and they'll collectively look after one another. But there's not that unless it's a natural disaster or some kind of major military threat, or some great act of violence. Otherwise, we're not reaching beyond our tribe to care for one another, and we're not in favor of government systems that will take care of those people who are not part of our tribe, because the people who are not part of our tribe are not good people, are not true Americans.
Right.
And so our new tribes are not bringing together a diverse group of people. They are more similar, at least certainly ideologically and often even culturally, racially. It seems to be, to me, the observation seems that it's moving that direction.
So as I listen to you, I'm assuming or thinking that this retribalization that you've just described is actually a deconstruction of social platforms, social groupings, social norms that were previously a part of who we were, a part of with whom we identified, a part of our social and emotional construct. It's a deconstructing. And so in essence, it's a destruction or a tearing down. Interestingly enough, I read a quote not long ago that said something to the effect of, whenever you take an action to create, the first thing you do is destroy.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You destroy, you deconstruct, you destroy, and then you create.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Mm-hmm.
question then becomes, okay, then what is being created? Back to Todd's idea of retribalization. What is being created? And then the author of this article reminds us that a lot of this has to do with our settings, our locales, our geography, the society in around us, the society that we're in. Let me share with you just a little clip or a reading, and then we can discuss it. In our personal lives, the small towns and rural areas in which the majority of conservatives live are the same places where neighbors and family members are more likely to come together to help one of their own in a time of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In cities and suburbs, which trend more liberal politically, people are more likely to live at a distance from their families and less likely than their rural counterparts to know all of their neighbors, let alone help them in a time of need. And I find it really interesting that we have this conversation today over collectivism and individualism, and we could even take this article with some of what the author is indicating, and we can overlay it onto the most recent electoral college map from 2020.
Yep.
That the red states, the blue states, the red areas, counties, geographies, the red counties, the blue counties and geographies, and to see how this mentality of individualism and collectivism seem to operate.
But I want to go back to something you were talking about just a bit ago, talking about the deconstruction. Things have to be deconstructed, and I think that that's very much a part of what's going on now. And I think it's part of what folks are screaming about on both sides, or feeling very anxious about on both sides. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, part of what folks are struggling with is that the myth that has been American exceptionalism has become deconstructed and has been destroyed. The America that I know is changing because of all of these people coming in. And what's being changed is that myth. What do we look like? Who are we? What is that? Who participates in this? And these folks, the folks coming in, the voices that we're now starting to listen to or to hear, or are screaming because they are tired of being shut out from the discussion, are changing that. And so what is coming apart is the America that people believed in and trusted in from the white perspective, particularly that white male perspective, and has to be redefined by allowing other voices into that. There's a real struggle within that with the loss of the common narrative. But the common narrative that was accepted was not the common narrative of America ever. I think that's part of the craziness that we're feeling, because America has never been the monolithic thing that we have said it is, but it's what's been written, and it's what so many people are screaming against on both sides, that it's coming apart, and how dare you, and then it's coming apart, yes, because others are getting to be a part here and to speak in here. And so there is this, you can be a radical individualist when everybody is the same kind of individual as you,
Yes.
but you can't be when that gets defined a different way.
This loss of common story is the loss of the story of the victor,
Mm-hmm.
because we've learned over the years that the victor is the one who earns the right to tell the story and to write the story. And so over our collective history as a country, from Pilgrim days forward, it's been the story of the victor.
Mm-hmm.
And now that story is changing. That story is deconstructing in real time in front of our faces. And that's going to do nothing but enhance the individualist perspective of isolation and insulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm losing everything I value. I'm losing everything that I identify with. And it heightens that sense of my life ends at the end of my nose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care about anything that happens beyond the tip of my nose. It's everything that happens before that that counts, over against the idea of trying to achieve the common good, work and struggle for the common good, and exercise cooperation as the glue that holds together very different and diverse people, thoughts, groups, perspectives. And it's in the absence of that cooperation that we then pull back into our neutral corners and we stay in our opposite angles from one another.
Well, and I'm wondering if part of this whole deconstruction of the myth is the fact that those of us Anglo-Saxon Protestants who have our heritage in this country of generational success and prosperity and individual self-determination, we have fundamentally denied that, in fact, the structure of our society was tilted towards our ability to be successful. And so the whole myth that we did this on our own, we've believed as gospel that we did it on our own, but in fact the government set it up so that those of us who were in the middle class already would continue and succeed even further, because the government was set up for us to succeed. And now that that myth is being deconstructed, both sides are right. Everybody knows that the myth of America is being deconstructed. The problem is one part of our country feels like the gospel is being taken away, that we're taking away the core identity of America, whereas the other side understands that it never was the mythology. The equality, justice for all was never true. There was
Right.
never justice for all. There was never prosperity for all. There was never equality for all. One side believes there was a time when that was the case, with some minor things that needed to be tweaked. The other side believes that needed to be changed, and those who had missed out on justice and equality for all needed to finally have a chance at it.
This I think is the struggle that is going on today for the narrative. Who are we going to be, and how are we going to define ourselves? And is it that supposed rugged individualism, I can do this all on my own, or is it a collective community together where we all have equal opportunities, real equal opportunities?
The author of this article hints at an observation. In true collective communities, cultures, and places like Japan, India, others that they were mentioning, one of the characteristics of that collectivism is all you have to do is identify the need, and somehow or another the need gets met. And then overlaying that onto American culture, that even as collectivists, when one asks or identifies a need for something, that person is expected to go through a litany of justification as to why you need it, you need it for, what you're going to do with it, and that the jury is out until justification can be made for that need or for that request.
Yeah, you have to have a reason, and a reason that we all think is good enough for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that is everything from needing childcare so you can go to work, to, well, I need the corporate bailout so that we can keep jobs. I need the tax incentives so that we will come to your place, so that we will create a tax base and stuff. All of that, it's the same all across the board.
I think we saw an example of this just recently in Long Beach. There had been hazard pay that had been given to retail workers, those working in grocery stores, because of their risk and exposure to people with COVID. And so the city had voted in a temporary hazard pay allowance that the grocery stores had to pay their workers. And when it was reapproved for an additional length of time, all of a sudden, the Kroger Corporation, which runs Ralph's supermarkets, said, we're no longer going to go along with this. If you're going to force us to do this, we will shut down our stores
Yep.
rather than pay the extra, I forget if it's $3 or $4 more an hour in hazard pay for the cashiers and the stock people. And so we see corporations determining the morality or the reasonableness of what the workers say they need. And I think in that spirit of individualism, we're seeing corporations define what we do and don't need, and we are at the mercy of that decision making.
As soon as I saw that on the news, my immediate thought was that they were not shutting down supermarkets in gentrified, up and coming neighborhoods,
No.
in trendy areas. They were planning and they were executing store closures in places in a city that already had a food desert risk. And in closing those stores, it probably solidified more of that food desert experience for the impoverished and marginalized communities. The idea of, you perhaps saw on the news over the weekend, the idea of people driving in Texas, in rural communities, people driving anywhere from 3 to 6 hours in one direction in order to go to the closest pharmacy, even taking shuttle buses and having vans and coordinating efforts to move people up and down these long Texas roads, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in one direction to get to the nearest pharmacy in order to get a COVID-19 vaccination. This idea of medical desert and pharmaceutical desert and food desert. Many of these towns don't even have a grocery store anymore.
Right.
That we are so steeped in our individualism that we cannot even do the collective work any longer of stabilizing each other's lives and making sure that we all have what we need for basic sustenance, for basic survival, and for basic satisfaction.
In our quest for individual freedom, we have actually allowed a few extremely powerful individuals and corporations to actually put all of us at much greater risk of being unable to not only care for ourselves, but when the need arises to support others, we don't even have the ability to come alongside and do that now, because the corporate entity, the high wealth individual, has way too much power to decide what's in their best interest. It's really not an equal playing field of a bunch of individuals all doing their own thing. It's actually a few individuals who are making decisions for everybody else, but still perpetuating the mythology that we help you be free, that
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
we will help you live the American dream, when in fact they're actually restricting and eliminating ways for you to live freely.
And the same person riding that bus or van for 4 or 5, 6 hours in one direction to get a COVID shot is willing to believe that narrative, that we're still the greatest nation on the face of the earth and we should all be thankful to be here. And that if you don't like it, then you can leave it.
And we saw this with that Texas snowstorm, where they instead of pointing at the failure of the state government and the corporations within that state, their failure to be connected to the broader national grid, and have done the work to winterize their operations in order for their power plants not to break down with extreme temperature. What do they do instead? They attack the small minor effort towards green energy that was part of a bigger collectivist vision, and they attack that as the problem rather than the major piece of the pie, which was a hyper individualism of corporate power that led to this problem.
This conversation today for me has truly become a double-edged sword. You know, a double-edged sword cuts both ways, because it started off as a conversation last week and today about individualism and collectivism mentality among people, persons. That's only one side of that sword. The other side of that sword that cuts equally true or equally as deep is the corporate and public side, the corporate side, the business side, the industry side. There is corporate individualism and collectivism as well. And I appreciate the way that we're shining light on that today, that it's not just a conversation about Joe or Jane or Jill or John. It's about groups and entities and corporations and businesses that also keep these and have these mentalities and foster these thought processes, and do so with very strategic, intentional design.
We are so much willing victims, not innocent victims, but willing victims to buy into the propaganda of the corporation. And sometimes we are ignorant victims of it too, because when corporations control all the marketing, everything commercialized that's out there is by entities with a very specific agenda for their own success and growth.
Sure.
And so they will craft messaging that works to make us feel like we're doing something grandly American by purchasing their product or by acquiring their services. And all it does is, in fact, reinforce their success of achieving their American dream much more than it ever accomplishes in getting us our American dream.
You know, with our iPads and our phones and things like that, all that stuff is tracked. You're tracked all the time. You know, there's always a GPS going. They know where you're going, everything. And there's this thing called fencing. You know, Google and these different internet companies and things sell that information about you, about where you go, and what they're looking for, what they're starting to move towards and things, is literally personalizing the ads. Like when you walk in a store, you walk into Macy's, you walk into Penny's, you walk into Kroger or Ralph's, and what is it that they say is that we collect information on you to enhance the user experience, so that you as the user can get things that are for you, to enhance your experience in your life and everything. That marketing language is back to, well, we want to catch you at the most vulnerable moment that you are, so that you will buy what we have for you. They're telling you the story they want you to hear, so that you will stay in that one place. It may be fake news, it may be not, but they're driving information at you so that you stay in your space, so that we know who you are, so that we catch just even these little bits of places where maybe you look at something different, so that we can direct and we can connect with you. I mean, and all of that goes back to this extreme individualism. What more do we know about you so that we can run our
Mhm.
society? We, as the ones with the information, can run our society with you
Yeah.
as basically you as the product. Then
That's right.
it it really is hyper individualism.
Nobody wants new grassroots groups to organize to do new things or to push against the system. Everyone wants to keep us kind of in a self-medicated state of believing a delusion that we are truly in charge of our own destiny and we can do it by ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm.
And one of the things I think about with that again is Jesus saying to us, keep awake. Keep awake. And how do you do that then? Is it being awake to the political movements and things, or is it being awake to the movement of the spirit, that is the flow of life, is the flow of everybody having a fullness in the garden, as opposed to just a few individuals.
I wonder too about collectivism, that which seeks the common good, working together, cooperation, bringing people together. I wonder that when that is manipulated or corrosive, does collectivism move from collective good to collective control? And what does collective control look like when originally trying to cooperate together to do good, now there seems to be perhaps this idea of a movement or a channel that you cannot escape, by which you're controlled at every turn by the group.
Well, it's interesting that it almost appears as if groups in power will talk about doing things for the collective good and sell that. I mean, there's some very moving commercials and moving political ads that give you this sense of we are part of this grand fabric of America, and we all pull together and do our great thing. And they try to sell that, but so that you will keep them in power or continue to use their goods and services. The power collective absolutely will seek to stomp out anything that would affect their ability to continue to do what they're doing. I mean, even look at what Amazon does. Any new company that rises up that starts to be any good at doing something, Amazon will just buy it
Mhm.
so that there is not a competitor doing something that would threaten any of Amazon's bottom line. It just will gobble it up.
Again, I think it has illustrated the double-edged sword approach.
Hmm.
And when we start talking structural and
Yeah.
systemic and organizational collectivism and individualism, that goes to a place that very few people want to discuss,
Right.
or may even not
Right.
know how to discuss.
Well, and like anything else, and back to the article, I was intrigued in the article where he talked about really the sense of balance that, and it's almost an organic balance that communities or people find. It is, I may be individualistic, but I know all my people around me, and we help one another and support one another and everything. Whereas I may be a collective kind of visionary sort of person, but I'm really in my own little silo in my suburb,
Mm.
that I don't know the people around me. And somehow there's an organic balance that I think both of them need, that we, like anything else, you can't be all one or the other, because they don't, stuff in its purity doesn't work. It
Mm.
doesn't function. The stuff that's best is the stuff that is an amalgam of things, a mixture of things.
Mm.
Um, it's not the element; it's the compound that works best. What I think we need to do more talking and conversing together to find out those places where the individual and the collective really can support one another by counterbalancing each other to bring a wholeness.
It's almost like we're due for another round of Roosevelts. We need a Theodore Roosevelt to come in and do some antitrust work to break up the big corporations where the power is getting centralized in way too few people. And then we need a Franklin Roosevelt to continue to move us into some collectivist government work to give a better shot to those who haven't had access. I mean, this COVID relief bill has included some incredible collectivist action for low income families with child tax credits that are be given on a monthly basis instead of one chunk at the end of the year, to help families throughout the year. Some things like that are really thinking about trying to give those who have missed out on the American myth a chance to move towards the middle class. A little bit of TR and a little bit of FDR is needed.
And also in a reference to MLK's thought that we shared last week, that the totality of truth is never found in the thesis or the antithesis. It's found in the middle. It's found somewhere in between. And how do we, as leaders, go forward and find that middle ground, that mid-road, that mid-path area that seems to be shrinking more by the day?
Thanks for listening. We'd love to have your feedback on today's conversation. Please email us at uncollarpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us at your favorite podcast provider, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. If you'd like to watch our program, please go to our Uncollared Podcast YouTube channel. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.